Breaking news: Poland shot down multiple Russian drones that violated its sovereign airspace during Moscow's latest wave of strikes on Ukraine, marking the very first time a NATO member has directly engaged and destroyed Russian military hardware inside its own territory, a development that instantly raised fears of a dangerous escalation in the already volatile conflict. And while Polish authorities stress that their actions were defensive in nature, designed to protect both civilians and national security interests, the symbolism of a NATO country shooting down Russian drones cannot be overstated because it represents a clear threshold that had not been crossed before, one that will now shape the security calculations of Moscow, Kiev, Brussels, and Washington, as well as every other capital in Europe. Since the incident demonstrates how the war in Ukraine continues to spill across borders and threatens to draw in NATO countries more directly, Poland has long been one of Ukraine's staunchest allies, supplying weapons, offering refuge to millions of Ukrainian civilians, and serving as a crucial logistics hub for Western military aid. And this shootdown reflects both Warsaw's zero-tolerance stance toward violations of its territory and the seriousness with which it views the threat posed by Russia's expanding drone campaign. The Polish military reported that several Russian Shah-type drones entered its airspace during the night raid, prompting its air defense systems to respond swiftly and decisively, intercepting and neutralizing them before they could endanger towns or infrastructure. Resident in eastern Poland described hearing loud explosions and seeing flashes in the sky, fueling anxiety about the war creeping closer to home. And while no casualties or damages were reported, the psychological impact has been profound. NATO immediately confirmed it was in close contact with Polish authorities, monitoring the situation closely and reaffirming that the alliance stands ready to defend every inch of member territory, a statement echoing Article 5 commitments that an attack on one is an attack on all, yet at the same time carefully calibrated to avoid giving Moscow a pretext to claim that NATO is entering the war directly. European Union leaders expressed solidarity with Poland and condemned Russia's reckless behavior, arguing that violations of NATO airspace threaten the security of the entire continent. The United States praised Poland's quick and professional response while warning Russia against further provocations, and Ukraine hailed the action as proof that Russia's aggression poses a risk to all its neighbors, not just Kiev. But Moscow, unsurprisingly, dismissed the incident as Western propaganda and insisted that its drones were only targeting Ukrainian sites, although its credibility remains questionable given repeated documented cross-border incursions. Analysts say this episode could mark a turning point in how NATO nations handle Russian aggression spilling into their skies. Until now, most incursions have been monitored or diplomatically protested, but this first kinetic action signals a new phase where NATO members may increasingly shoot down hostile drones or missiles, setting precedents that could either deter Moscow or escalate the confrontation further. Poland's President Andrzej Duda convened an emergency security meeting, emphasizing that Warsaw will not hesitate to protect its people and that Russia must understand Poland is not Ukraine, meaning any attack on its territory will have consequences. Yet he also underscored that Poland seeks to avoid escalation and will coordinate every step with NATO allies. The incident comes at a time when Russia has been intensifying its drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure in preparation for the winter, hoping to break civilian morale and cripple the economy. But in doing so, it has pushed its campaign ever closer to NATO's borders, raising the risk of miscalculation. Military experts warn that as Russia relies more heavily on Iranian-supplied Shah drones, which are relatively cheap and difficult to control, more cross-border incidents are likely, forcing NATO members like Poland, Romania, and Slovakia to remain on constant alert. Already Romania has reported fragments of Russian drones landing on its territory in past months, though without direct intercepts, and thus Poland's shootdown is seen as precedent-setting. Regional populations are on edge, with Polish citizens voicing fears that their country could be dragged into open conflict, while simultaneously expressing pride that their military acted decisively to defend the homeland. Across Europe, debates are intensifying over how far NATO should go in defending its skies without triggering direct war with Russia. Some argue that firm action is needed to deter Moscow, while others worry about uncontrolled escalation. The United Nations has called for restraint and renewed dialogue, but diplomatic channels remain strained as Russia shows little sign of scaling back its assault on Ukraine, instead doubling down with larger waves of drones. The long-term implications of Poland's action are significant because they underscore both the fragility of the security environment in Eastern Europe and the resilience of NATO unity. And as winter approaches, the world will be watching closely whether this incident remains Isolated defensive action becomes the first of many such confrontations on NATO soil. In either case, Poland's shoot-down of Russian drones stands as a historic moment in the war, a reminder that the conflict's front lines are not neatly contained, and that every incursion carries the risk of widening a war that has already devastated Ukraine and unsettled the global order.